next speaker joins us from Mad Cow's neighborhood, New England. It's Brian McLaughlin, Chief Experience Officer at Bottomline Technologies. Brian leads the product innovation team to deliver best-in-class customer experiences across Bottomline's suite of business payment solutions. And Brian also has the somewhat dubious honor of being FXD's first returning speaker, so very excited to have you back, Brian. With that, Brian McLaughlin to talk about evolving your UX practice.
I'm Brian McLaughlin. I'm the Chief Experience Officer for Bottomline Technologies. What Bottomline Technologies is we supply various companies with solutions that allow them to pay and get paid. So the reason I point that out is that my role in our job, our industries that we serve are all business related. So we only do commercial in the financial world. We don't do consumer. So that may spill out a little bit in what I'm about to talk to you about, but what I am going to talk to you about will apply to consumer or commercial. It doesn't matter either way. So as you can see, and you've already read ahead, I'm going to talk about evolving the UX practice and 8 things that we know. And I'm actually going to add a couple at the very end of things that we don't know, or at least I should say, I don't know. I can't speak for everybody. Even though I have some ideas, I'm going to leave that out there as just things that we're always exploring. So we're going to do a countdown. So we're going to start at 8. So number 8, what to show and to whom. I often see this, mistakes happen around this and some stumbles happen around this in that we show uninteresting things to people that we shouldn't show them to. And then we show and then we don't show the uninteresting things to people that when we should show them. So what do I mean by that? So what I mean by that is I have sat through some very executive meetings in which somebody's presenting, hey, look, we added a new element inside of a dropdown. I literally have had people elbow me, others with C-level titles, and say, what are you doing? That doesn't look very good. Which, of course, makes someone squirm in their seat a little bit because all I'm thinking is, why did we show that? That doesn't make any sense why this would even have come up. So essentially what they were doing was the person was showing a new feature functionality, and for some reason they decided to show it through the UI, which was essentially adding a new drop-down item, which is not very interesting. But with the compelling part of what was interesting was what the new capabilities were to our customers. So in one case, showcasing this uninteresting thing in this manner was a misstep. But showing the exact same thing to a different group, a technical group, it went over extremely well because once they showed the item in the dropdown, everybody understood what went on, what it meant, and everything else. So this is one of the things that we are constantly working on in the UX space. It's actually just understanding what to show and when to show it as it reflects back to the UX world. Number 7, put the noise at the correct end of the cycle. So there's a good place for noise and there's a bad place for noise. And what I mean by the cycle is between conceptualizing what a product can be and having customers using it over a period of time. So the bad way to look at this, or the bad approach that I often see happen, is groups talk themselves into the situation where it's going really well. So, we have the requirements, we have the technical foundation laid in, and we have the design work done, and maybe there's some prototype work. And the release cycles are going, and the Scrum meetings are meeting, and it's all going super well. Well, then there's go live, and then all the noise starts. The customers get it, and it's not what they wanted. It doesn't work for them. It costs too much. It doesn't cost enough. The support's not working. There's all kinds of other problems that happen. The good way to do this, which is going to seem super obvious, but a lot of groups don't bother to take it on because it is painful and it's noisy, and sometimes that's interpreted as something's gone wrong. Where actually, if you put the noise up in front of the cycle, that means things are going really well because you're taking care of all that. So if you think about all those things and we start looking at it from the perspective of you've done research and we've kind of gotten out of the way, we kind of stumble into the little dark corners that we didn't know about, we take care of all that before the go live happens so that when it rolls out with a customer base, it's well understood, it's going much more smoothly. And by the way, you can see that that line is not dead flat. It doesn't mean there won't be noise. It just means we cut down on the noise significantly. So one of the things that we absolutely know is to take the time, take the noise, take the hit, and help other groups understand it's okay that we're kind of working through the noise here, because it's much better here than when the customers come back and tell us. Number 6, process saves and process kills. So everybody has a process, or at least everybody's attempting to get a process in place. Design thinking, double diamond, there's all kinds of different processes. They all work really well as long as the team is disciplined and uses them, which kind of gets into the process kills part, which is, well, you change processes. We add more steps. Somebody new comes in and they want to reshuffle the deck a little bit. All these things happen because generally the focus becomes the process, and the goal is not the process. The process helps towards the goal. To just say something really bumper sticker like, right? So what I've often seen is the process is overdone. It should take a small amount of time, and it takes a huge amount of time, or the process gets redone because there seemingly was a step missed. Or all these other things where the focus becomes more and more on the process, it takes up too much time, and you get a big backlash from that. So not only getting a process in place, but having the discipline to run it and run it well and understand what's enough and just get it right size is super important. Understanding design systems is number 5. So I'm certainly not going to tell anybody what a design system is. It's a pretty well-known process at this point, but the way to think about this, they can either be your best friend or your worst enemy. People are familiar with the best friend part, like they add discipline, they add a level of continuity across your products. It allows more efficiency. People know what they're doing. They know how to use it. You can bring on a new designer, get them up to speed on the design system. They become very productive very quickly. All the great things about design systems. The bad side of a design system is suddenly everything looks exactly alike. All your innovation starts looking alike. All your new landing pages or other things, they all look alike. And from a designer's perspective, you can look at it and go, well, see, there's a slight different curve here, metaphorically, right? There's a slightly different curve here. But from an end user's perspective, it's like it all looks alike. It's all kind of the same thing, and it all gets kind of vanilla, and it becomes very hard to break that pattern. So as design leaders, one of the things I often talk to design leaders about is knowing when to break the pattern and when not to break the pattern. It becomes a bit tricky because if everybody's breaking all the time, then of course you don't actually have a design system, and it's certainly not being used. But there's an understanding of how to get that balance right. Number 4, track it down. Anybody that's participating in this conference knows that building software is complicated. The subject matter is complicated. Organizing teams is complicated. There's a lot that takes place. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. Security gets involved. Compliance gets involved. Finance gets involved. Which they should, but it gets very, very complicated. So one of the things that we often talk about is just track it down. And what we want to find out is pinpoint where things go off track. I think everybody you can pull out loads of examples of, we designed this, but this came out. What you want to know is why. Like, why did it come out? Did it come out just through a series of compromises, or did it come out because it always gets to one spot through the process where a decision gets made, which you may or may not be aware of, and it suddenly shoots off? Quick anecdote of that is we had, I used to put what was I always called them tracers. I put a little tracer on a project. It's like, I want to know where this comes off, because I have a feeling it's going to come off. So we had this little really interesting graphic that we had put on as a data visualization that we put on, and sure enough, it fell out. So I was able to track down where it fell out, how it fell out, and then pinpoint that exact thing, have a conversation with that group and just say, look, let's understand what's going on here. Reveal the secret. The secret was that we had a group making the estimate of how much time it was going to take, which was not the group that should have made that estimate. Because once I gave it to the other group, they said that should take about 4 hours. The original group said it was going to take 4 weeks. So just being able to pinpoint where that happened was super, super helpful to smooth out the process. Number 3, acknowledge your team. This will sound like the most obvious thing in the world, but the way I think about this is not only celebrating your team, but just also understanding that your team, you and your team, by the way, will at various periods of time, you're going to feel underappreciated. They got the spotlight. We didn't get the spotlight. Well, here's the dirty little secret. Everybody feels like that. Every group, individuals within groups, and I don't mean just in the UX group, product people will feel that way because the sales group got all the credit. The technical group will feel that way because UX got all the credit. There's all kinds of different ways where you and your team are going to feel slightly slighted, and you have to help them get past that. It really is about the overall goal. And as a design leader, many times what we do is look at, well, how do I make sure that my team is getting the acknowledgement that they so deserved? Number 2, start smart. If you joined this conference a couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to do a presentation about setting bars. And essentially what that was all about was making sure that we're starting in a good spot. If we're starting in a spot that's already compromised, meaning the goal is too easy, the bar is too low, then we're headed at an area where it's going to get more compromised, because the more people get involved, the more compromised it gets. So as a design leader, we have to set those expectations and those goals very high. The other thing that I see sometimes happen is too many self-imposed rules. Well, we have to follow this, we have to follow that, we have to do it this way. Next thing you know, we've kind of talked our way into a yet even smaller box or a lower bar. So in some cases, we haven't set the goal high enough. In some cases, we put our own rules in place, which then restrict us for even moving on. Now, as a design leader, of course, this is similar to the design system, is that if you break the rules all the time, then just chaos ensues and you can't scale, which is always a big issue. And the number 1 thing that I have on my list today is the UX of UX. So what I mean by this is that I often see UX teams are phenomenal about empathizing with the end users and the groups and all those types of things. But that same empathy many times is not applied internally. What I mean by that is we'll do some great research and discovery and prototype work because we just have day in the life in the shoes of, empathize with, all the other acronyms and so forth that fall into that. But then we go back and we do battle. We do battle with the product group, or we do battle with the technology group, or we do battle with security or whatever. Instead of thinking about it from the UX perspective of just wearing that hat all the time, is, well, what is product trying to get done? What are their pain points? How can I help with that? So I always refer to this as the UX of UX, is just making sure that the practice of UX is done all the time, not just with the end user groups, but even getting the work done. So I'll just mention a couple of quick things of, I stole some of you may know where this phrase comes from, but known unknowns, right? They're just things that we know that we don't really know how to solve for. The first one I would put here is how to get more UX leaders and practitioners to drive the business. Now, what I mean by that is most UX leaders, I'm sure everybody that's participating here has an understanding of what business you're in, what the revenue goals are for your company. But are we every day thinking about those in terms of, but what can I do about it? Not if only sales would do something. It's like, no, like what can we do about it? And that is part of being a responsible owner within the company, is understanding what we can do about it as leaders, but also getting our teams to understand this too. So yes, discussions about border radius are important. Yes, we should get that nailed down. Continuing on those conversations is a waste of time. Right? Like once a decision is made, we have to get the teams over that, and we have to get the teams understanding what the impact that they're making to the customers and how big an impact any one of their decisions makes. We go through this sometimes. We've had a design system at Bottomline for a little over 7 years. So we've gone through many variations. We've gone through all the pain of getting it in place. We've gone through the pain of different versions and everything else. But what we still like at most groups is, when you get to over that hump, is things like what is the impact of making a decision and how does that impact the business? So it's not so much about the design system anymore. It's about what does this have to do with growing and driving the business? The second thing is how to get more business owners to hear UX leaders. There's a kind of a snake eating its tail thing here. And by the way, I'm not talking about like, oh, I should go to a management school, or oh, we have an internal program about how to become a manager or how to lead people or what HR, legal HR means. That's not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is UX taking an active role of growing the business. directly impacting revenue. Coming up with new things, being part of sales groups, and not only being part of sales groups. I don't know if anybody on this conference has actually had a quota. It's a very challenging thing to have a sales quota and drive towards that quota. It's a very, like when you do that, you get a very different understanding of how the business works. So anyway, the kind of unknowns for me, at least at the moment, I'd love to hear people's ideas here, is like how to help people see that. And from a design perspective, and particularly the last one about how to get more business owners to hear UX leaders. Most UX people come at problems a very interesting way. But historically, many UX people and design in general has been kind of like, yeah, you guys make pretty things. So this, particularly in the big enterprise space, there's always an interesting, for me anyway, it's an always interesting puzzle that is constantly trying to be worked out. And for me, it's still a bit of an unknown how to solve that one. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everybody. And I'd like to thank MadPow for putting on this conference. And I believe we're going to move into some Q&A.
Brian, thanks for being here and for that talk. Second time to boot. Much appreciated.
Yeah, it's great to have to be able to come back. So now I can also state that I've been in live and I've been the virtual one, and it's also very interesting to go later in the day because I get to hear all the other great presenters, and there are some common threads throughout the day, which is really nice to hear.
Absolutely, yes, no, for sure, and I really appreciate, I think, with you that those unknowns, there's so much that we haven't figured out, and I'm a firm believer that the more we can surface those unknowns and talk about them, the closer we're going to get to the right solution. So maybe someone in this conference will throw an idea your way.
Yeah, well, that would be great. I've been at this for a very long time, as you can tell from the missing hair and the gray in the beard. I've been around a few blocks and many different companies, many different situations, and still learning every time I go through this. Every day is interesting.
Well, we won't review the tape from a few years ago. We won't make that side-by-side comparison.
Yeah, I was much younger and better looking then.
Well, we do have a couple questions from the audience, so I'm going to grab some of those and throw them at you here. So first off, what are some ways to inject flexibility into a design system in order to enable creativity and avoid being stale or rigid, like the car example you showed?
Yeah, I should have put this in my unknowns. So that's a really challenging question. To be perfectly frank, we're still struggling with this. Like I mentioned in the talk, we've had a design system in place for a long time. I have had design systems in place prior to joining Bottomline, and it gets more difficult at scale. So I guess I'd say it this way, and similar to kind of personas for people or companies, right? Is if you're a smaller company. And you can directly influence the design work and have be able to kind of stick your fingers in the middle of it, if you will, in different places, and you have the rapport with your team, then you can kind of go in and just go, okay, here's where the break point is. So yes, it's using the design system, but for the initial landing page, so to speak, we're going to break from that a little bit. The bigger you get, the more challenging it gets. So usually what we have been doing is we're looking for things like, this is an area in which there is no component in the design system. So let's really think about how this is done and think about it from the perspective of what's best for the end customer, what will provide the most value to the customer and for the company itself. And also kind of surprise and delight everybody involved. In many cases, that's not add another table of information. It's like, what is just another way to do that? Whereas the table, or the grid, as we call it in our company, that's a design element that sits in the design system. Various data visualizations and other data experiences are not necessarily something that fits nice and neat into a design system. But anyway, to answer the question, we look for specific opportunities where it's a landing page or it's we understand the relationship between these elements or objects there is no design system element for this, so here's another opportunity. So we do look for them, and then it gets into this other interesting scenario where, okay, but does that go in the design system? So it does. It's kind of a never-ending little creative challenge to work through.
Totally. Yeah, it's kind of creativity within constraints, and you got to find those constraints and then work within there for sure. So another question here, any tips on how to best handle a process where, for whatever reason, the team is forced to put the noise in the post-launch part of the plan, design, or build process?
Yeah. Again, I wish I had the magic wand. So this is one of these things that I'll be perfectly frank. I have the luxury of having a C in my title, so I can kind of go in and go, oh hey, wait, we're not going to do that. Now I also know, like most people that have more senior titles, is none of us came out and just suddenly had this title. We worked our way up through, right? So what I found before I had the ability to just go, hey, stop doing that and do it this way, was I will do it as kind of a shadow, if you will, a shadow effort. Okay, if we're not going to take care of this up front, I still need to know this information before it goes live or after it goes live. I still need the information. I need some kind of predictability about what's going to happen. I know that we're going to get bit by this customer service call because even in testing it 5 times, I know this is a stumbling block. It's a word we chose to use, it's a flow we decided to do, or whatever. So even if I couldn't put it way up front, I try to get it like right before the go live, or I would just arm my customer service groups with it and just go, hey, I know what's coming. Let me give you a little heads up. So then what we could do is, from a customer service perspective, we could knock it down a little bit. It's like, okay, then when those calls would come in, we were prepared for them. So it didn't eliminate the noise. It was still bumpy. But I just knew if I don't have time for it up here, or for whatever reason, it's not going to get done up there, I have to find another place to put it, even if it's like 10 minutes before it goes live, just to arm the customer support groups.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that ties even back to another theme of today, which is developing relationships across your organization so you can easily have those conversations and kind of be prepared to adjust for whatever the need may be.
Yeah, and as one of the speakers earlier today mentioned, the whole spend time on customer service calls, just listening in, so that also formulates that relationship, because then that partnership that you have with your customer service group is they know that you're on their side. It's like, I'm not just chucking stuff out into the wild and you guys deal with the after effects. It's like, no, I'm as concerned about it as you are, and it helps quite a bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're all in this together, for sure. And kind of along those lines, I did want to ask about this, the track it down experimentation that you had talked about. And I'm curious, kind of a two-parter here, if you have any, ideas on how to kind of take, once you've tracked something down, an issue or something where the process breaks, how you turn that into a meaningful opportunity. And then second part, any tips for backing it down without coming across as betraying trust or kind of micromanaging?
Yeah, and I'll do it in reverse order. So because I mentioned the whole C title thing, right, is I have a different way to handle that now than I did 15 years ago. So I'll talk about it 15 years ago. So 15 years ago, what I would do is I would just, again, it's all about partnerships. It goes back to that UX of UX, or as one of the earlier speakers also talked about, empathy for your coworkers and partnerships that you form. So some of that is that whole trust building, et cetera, is when I would find where the pain point was, or the hiccup, or the sand pit, or whatever you want to call it, hopefully I already had that relationship built. And if I didn't, I would just work it out. But it wasn't so much, hey, my opinion is this and you're doing it wrong, as let me show you what the ramifications of this are. Yes, we could take that out. However, it's tested to be a very valuable piece. Or if we take that piece out, it actually destroys the rest of the understanding of how this works. So it wasn't so much a, hey, I'm coming in to tell you what you're doing wrong. It was more about, let me bring you into the tent. Let me make sure that you understand also why we did what we did, and then let's work about getting it put back in place.
Totally. Yeah. Context matters again.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thanks so much for being here. This has been great. Very much appreciated. I hope we can have you back for year 3 at some point. Do it a little bit longer. So thank you.
I don't think I'll get hair back. The beard might grow longer.